so good that I get the opportunity to be here with you. I'm thrilled. Like Andy said yesterday, getting to talk to church leaders in an environment like this is in so many ways one of my favorite things to do. And it's different to preaching in church, right? Because you all are on my team and you all agree with me on most things belief-wise, and so I don't have to break things down as much, which is often hard. Does anybody find that it's harder to preach on Sundays than it is to speak at something like, am I the only one? It's so much harder, like what you guys do. Jono and I talk about this, Pastor Jonathan from this church and I talk about this all the time, that the idea of speaking to unchurched people in so many different ways is so much harder because it requires so much extra work, because we know that this is an opportunity for us to teach something about Scripture with the goal in mind of being to get them to come back next week. And with you guys, I don't have to worry about getting you to come back next week because this is done in a couple of days. I was thinking on the way here, as I was driving to this church, and my wife and I moved back from Atlanta at the end of 2020. About November 2020, we went into 2 weeks quarantine in Sydney. And so this now, we decided if we're coming back, we were away for 13 years. If we're going to live anywhere in Australia, where do you want to live? Because we're originally from Melbourne. And we said, let's live on the Sunshine Coast. Why not? And then
the rest of Australia?
This weather keeps turning up, right? So it is really good up here though, Jonathan. You're 100% right, this is the place to live. But I remember I was driving on the way here and my thought went to the last time I was speaking at a North Point partner event in this church. And I stood literally right there for the very first session of that 5 years ago. And it's almost 5 years to the day, almost. And we talked about what the future of the church in Australia could potentially look like. And so to have the opportunity now to stand up in front of all of you guys and talk about a little bit more about what the future of the church could be in Australia, I'm just so thrilled that I get the opportunity to do that. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, what the future of the church could potentially look like, especially in this post-pandemic world that we live in. We're all making things up because none of us have ever led through a pandemic before. None of us have ever pastored through a pandemic before. None of us have ever done ministry through a pandemic before. So we're in fresh territory, and I think this is the best possible place for us to be, because when we're in fresh soil, new things start to grow.
Love that.
And so I really believe that and I'm going to unpack the why behind this, but I really believe that in the next couple of years, there's going to be a big turning point in Australia. And I'd love to be able to say to you right now that that's prophetic, but it's not. It's actually just based on data. And that's what I want to unpack a little bit today. So as Pogo said, I'm currently, I do a whole bunch of different things here in Australia. Part of that is I'm the Orange Director for Australia and New Zealand. So I've loved having some Orange conversations, but I'm not going to talk about Orange today. Well, I might, because we're going to do a Q&A afterwards and you guys can ask me any question. And honestly, that's going to be my favorite bit, because here's something I didn't prepare, but this is a big thing for me. The reason I love doing Q&As with leaders like you is that's when we get to contextualize information.
Right.
You get to ask me questions about your situation. And regardless of anything you've heard about social media, content is not king on social media. Context is king on social media. Context is king. If you're talking to the people in your local community where God has called you to serve, if you're talking to the families who live within driving distance of your church building, if you're talking to them on social media every day, then you're talking into their context. Context is king. And so I'm looking forward to that opportunity to take some questions and hopefully provide some context for you all as well. So yeah, I'm the Orange Director for Australia and New Zealand. Previous to that, as Perko said, I spent 5 and a bit years at a church in New Jersey, gave up my career as a TV sports reporter and producer at Channel 10 in Melbourne, which I did for about 8 years, and then moved into full-time ministry. And when God called my wife and I into full-time ministry, he called us to America as well, which was really weird. Called us to New Jersey, which some people said was even weirder, but for me it wasn't, because I grew up loving Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen, so I felt like I was home in New Jersey. And then 5.5 years into that, 2013, God called us to Atlanta. And the cultural shift from Melbourne to New Jersey was nothing compared to the cultural shift from New Jersey to Atlanta. In Atlanta, it's so different to Australia. In Atlanta, it's not whether or not you go to church. The question is, which church do you go to? Because everybody goes. And so I had a beer yesterday with Chris and Riley, and Chris asked me a great question. He said, what's the biggest cultural shift you've felt since you've been back? And I said, part of it is that. It's that idea that not everybody goes to church. But while that's a cultural shift, it's also the biggest opportunity that we have, because not everybody goes to church. And this is what I want to unpack a little bit today, is how we can reach those people who are not asking questions in our church buildings, but are asking questions online. So I became a pastor in New Jersey, online pastor in 2008. I was the 8th online pastor in the world. That's a whole other story. And I built that ministry up, and then went to Atlanta in 2013 and worked with Andy and the team down there, and Julian worked across the hall, and I did that for 7 years. My wife, Meg, who's here as well, who's way smarter than I'll ever be, but she worked for North Point for 7 years also. She was in the Global X space, which is our mission field. So she was working with partner churches around the world, like we were talking yesterday about South Point in South Africa, and she would send teams around the world as well. So, we've got quite a lot of experience in that field, in that North Point world. Now, back then, I remember when I first became an online pastor, I would get pushback all the time. People would say, hey, what are you doing in ministry? Well, I'm an online pastor. And, at first in 2008, they would, it's not a real pastor. That would be some of the pushback that I would get. And then as the years progressed and people started to see, online had potential, I still got pushback, but the pushback changed. They realized there was an opportunity for ministry online, but the pushback became a little bit different. But then COVID changed all of that. When COVID hit, when the pandemic forced churches to close their doors, everything started to shift, and online became our lifeline. For church leaders, online became our lifeline. And everybody's theology changed to suit. Everybody started to shift their theology just a little bit, because they had no other choice than to do online. But then restrictions started to lift, buildings started to open up, and everybody could start coming back inside their buildings again. And then what we saw was that when church leaders stepped back into their building, a lot of them stepped back into time. When church leaders started going back inside their buildings and they stepped back into that space, they stepped back into time. And the innovation that the church had experienced during that COVID lockdown period, and the way that we were leveraging technology, the way we were leveraging online, that started to get forgotten. And we slipped back into old traditions, and we slipped back into old ways of thinking. And we started to be married to the model instead of being married to the mission. And once again, I started hearing the same old pushback, that online didn't count, that online wasn't real. And to be honest, I wasn't really surprised by that. That was kind of what I expected once doors opened up again and people could go back to doing things the way they always did. And I especially wasn't surprised that a lot of that pushback came from what we would deem, I guess, larger and more successful churches. I wasn't surprised by that. And author R.T. Kendall sums up why. He says this: sometimes the greatest opposition to what God wants to do next comes from those who are on the cutting edge of what God did last. The greatest pushback to what God wants to do in the next season will come from the people who are on the bleeding edge of what God was doing in the previous season. Often that is the case. And this happens because moving into something new, moving into what God is doing next, requires us to change. It requires innovation. And innovation is a scary concept, especially in church world. See, the reality is that the exercise of innovation requires a commitment to something that is not guaranteed to work. When we start innovating something, when we start trying something new, often it won't work. Andy told that great story last night about the fundraising story, right? How he had this great idea, but he went with it and then it failed. Innovation requires us to risk something. It requires us to risk not succeeding. And it's not easy to do that, especially when we're in church world, because we know that the gospel requires so much more of us, but the gospel's not worth risking. And so I think we're hesitant to innovation as a result of that. And that's why it's so easy just to go back to the way we did things pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, right? It becomes so easy to do that. But if there's one thing that I've learned over the past 13, 14 years as an online pastor, It's that right now, in this season that we are currently in, the church needs more innovation than ever before.
Yeah.
The church is ripe for it, and we need it more than ever before. You look through church history, and there are times when innovation comes, and it's roughly every 500 years or so. Printing press, 500 years ago, innovation happens. Internet comes 500 years later, a couple of decades ago, innovation starts to come around again one more time. And the reason that the church needs to innovate now is not because of COVID-19 in the world, but because of indifference in the world.
Right.
The world needs to, the church needs to rethink how we do church, not because COVID-19's happening all around us, but because this is the reality in Australia. Indifference happens all around. People are so indifferent to church. I have a lot of church leaders often tell me that online is the biggest threat to in-person. And I say, no, it's not. Indifference is the biggest threat to in-person. People won't come if they're indifferent to the message, if they're indifferent to the church. And I see that in Australia a lot more, quite honestly, than I saw it in Atlanta. I see it a lot more for a whole bunch of different cultural reasons. It just exists here. And I think it probably exists in America as well. Julian will be able to unpack that. But in Australia, it doesn't just exist under the surface. It literally exudes from people's pores. When you talk about church, like again, if I'm sitting at a cafe with somebody and the church leader's talking to me, they lower their voice when they say the word church. Well, we've got a church of about 40,000 people. I'm like, what? Why did you go down? Oh, I get it. That's right. Because people are so indifferent. There's so much Aussies wear their heart on their sleeve when it comes to indifference in the church, when it comes to how much they don't like church people, right? Because of so many different things that have happened in the world. So this is why I think we need to be more innovative than ever before. And there are two truths that I think we need to make sure we're aware of when it comes to what's happening in innovation, when it comes to what's happening online. The two truths that we have to wrestle with are these. The first one is that online technology is not going away. Online technology, it's not going away. It's not like now that churches are opening their building again, Amazon and Netflix are getting together going, you know what, we should sell less online. You know what, let's not stream movies anymore. Let's go back to sending DVDs out to people. It's not going to happen less, it's actually going to start happening more. And as church leaders, we need to wrestle with that reality. Coles and Woolworths, two of the biggest supermarkets in Australia, they're right now testing hybrid models of shopping where you can shop online and then drive up and they'll put, somebody will come out and put it into your car. This is something that we already experienced in America, but in Australia, Coles and Woolworths are playing around with that right now. So we have to recognize and wrestle with the fact that online technology is not going away. And the second thing is, and this is a harder one, the second reality is that people were turning their back on the church long before the pandemic started. All the statistics tell us that the church was in decline long before COVID-19 became a thing. Even before COVID hit, more people were attending less or not attending at all. In 2019, Pew Research showed in the US that 32% of Gen X Christians attended church services every week. Only 32% of Gen X Christians. This is Gen X people who identified as Christians. Only 32% of them went to church every week.
What country is that?
In the US. I'm going to get to Australia. Also in the US, Pew Research tells us that only 22% of millennial Christians attended weekly. In that same year, Barna Research in the US said that 29% of people of any age who identified as church attenders attended every week. Only 29% of people who said, hey, I'm a church attender. Great, how often do you go? Not every week. In 2019, pre-COVID, polls in Australia by McCringle showed that only 22% of Australian Christians attended church every week. And then in 2021, Statista updated that information and said that it was 24% of what they called religious people attended every work. Again, these are people who identified as Christians. They're on our team, yet they weren't showing up every week. And it told me something really important, that even people who attend church had stopped attending church before the COVID pandemic shut down churches. Now, sitting in a room full of leaders, and I just put a whole bunch of stats on the screen, and I look at everybody's faces, and everybody it's easy to get depressed by that, right? It's easy to get frustrated. But before you get too depressed, let me give you a light at the end of the tunnel, okay? Barna research showed that at the end of 2019, again, this is pre-COVID shutdowns, end of 2019, Barna showed that 38% of practicing Christians use social media to grow their faith. 38% to grow their faith. 26% accessed a sermon or podcast or message on podcasts regularly, and 26% watched or listened to a streamed church service. So even pre-pandemic, people were starting to leverage technology to access your church's content, right? Statistics show us this. And the interesting thing to me about those two last statistics, that 26%, is the Christian book world around the world pulled together a whole bunch of information about how many Christians use books to disciple themselves to grow in their faith, and the answer was 26%. So 26% of people use Christian books to grow their faith, and 26% are also watching services online. And isn't it interesting as church leaders, if somebody came up to us and said, hey, I'm reading this awesome book by naming the author, right? Whoever you think of in your head right now, this awesome Christian book, and I'm using that to grow my faith. We would go, that's awesome, that person's growing. But if the same person came up to you and said, hey, I'm watching services online, it's so easy for us to go, well, when are you going to come back to real church? It's the same percentage, yet because one is easier for us to accept, we think it's okay. People are leveraging technology to grow their faith. In addition to this, I know from personal experience as the North Point Online pastor for so long, that pre-pandemic, like 2018 was when our YouTube channel started to grow exponentially with more people than ever watching our services online. In fact, in 1 month after we keyword optimized some messages, our subscription and our viewer time and our number of views and our viewer retention doubled. 125% increase in 1 month pre-pandemic. More people than ever were watching our services online. We're listening to Andy's messages on podcasts. We're watching on YouTube and connecting with the church via digital means than ever before. And this was pre-pandemic. In this way, I believe that church attendance has not been decreasing, it's been decentralizing.
Right.
People are still accessing your content, but they're just doing it in online ways. Now, I know that this might be hard to hear. And I get why it's hard to hear. If I can be really honest with you, I think one of the reasons why it's hard to hear is that as church leaders, as pastors, as people who communicate from a stage, whether it's in family ministries, student ministries, or on stage in the adult service, we measure our success and we measure our self-worth based on how many people are sitting in front of us. I think this is why that statement is so hard to hear. We don't want it to decentralize because it means we have less people sitting in front of us. And even if we're leading worship, we judge our success by how many hands we see raised. And I think it's time we stopped getting our self-worth. We stopped measuring our success by how many people are sitting in front of us, amening and cheering us on whenever we make a really good point. We have to measure it by something else, and we need to start measuring success in the church world a little bit differently. But I think also just for us as pastors, I'm sorry I'm standing and sitting up and you have to keep changing that to the YouTube guy. But I really think this is an important point. So that's why I'm standing up. We have to stop measuring our self-worth by how many people are in the room. And we need to start seeing that there are people who are watching it and we're making a difference in their lives, but we just don't know it instantly because they're not sitting in front of us. They're listening on a podcast later on. And the thing is, I think we all recognize, if we get really honest with ourselves, that we do that, and we justify those feelings by quoting scripture. We use Hebrews 10:25 to justify those feelings. We say, but let us not neglect our meeting together. And we say that's why it's so important to us. But meeting together in the first century was different to the ability to meet together in the 21st century. We can do it differently right now. And so that word gather together in Greek means something different than it does today. And it's not that we need to change the definition. I think we need to expand the definition just a little bit of what it means to meet together. And if you've done anything on Zoom over the past couple of years, you know that you can still meet together. It's not the same. And please hear me on this. I am not saying, and I would never say, that online should replace in-person. Never would say that. I don't know an online pastor at all, anywhere in the world, who would say that online can replace in-person. But we have to recognize that in-person happens, and it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. For me, all the data tells me that people are connecting with your churches, whether they're in the room or not, because they're supplementing those in-between stages by watching online, by streaming services, by listening to a podcast. And this is why, for me, it's not a Hebrews 10 issue, and it's never been a Hebrews 10 issue. It's totally a Mark 16 issue. Mark 16 says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Jesus told all of his followers to go into the world. And I did a comprehensive deep dive research into the Greek and the Hebrew behind that word go. And it's funny, in both languages that means to go, to actually move. It's a verb, it's to do something. We have to actually go and preach the gospel. And in the modern world, that word, go into all the world includes Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, podcast, email, SMS. That's all the world that we're living in right now. Think about it, guys, every single day, everybody at your church carries with them in their pocket a worship team, a small group, a pulpit, and an offering plate in their pocket every single day. And we're missing an opportunity if we don't leverage this when we think of that, go into all the world and preach the gospel. But most churches aren't doing this because we use this device to promote our physical attendances instead of using it to promote spiritual disciplines. We get online and we say, come to our church this Sunday for this awesome service that nobody who's watching it cares about. We use this to promote physical attendance instead of using it to promote spiritual disciplines. What if we change that just slightly? So you don't make disciples go into all the world and preach the good news, and we've got to go into all the world and make disciples. You don't make disciples by inviting people to events. You would make disciples by inviting people to life-changing conversations. And that can happen online. You know, Jesus didn't say, stay in your church building and ask people to come to you on a day that's preferable to you, at a time that works for you, and then preach the gospel. Jesus said, go and preach the gospel. Yet the model that we've set up in so many ways says, no, you come to us on Sundays at 9 or 10 or 5 p.m. and then we'll preach the gospel, right? I remember when I first got into ministry, full-time ministry, the churches that my wife and I were a part of, the pastors would talk about this key verse that was the driving light for every church plant that we were part of, for every church. Oh, this is what being in church is all about. This is what ministry is all about. And they would use Acts 2:42 to 47, which I'm sure everybody in this room could probably quote verbatim because we've all used it, right? This is why we got into ministry. Why did you get into Acts 2:42 to 47, right? We all know that story and what was happening, and we all love that idea. And part of the reasons we love that idea is everybody was gathering together, right? And because we, especially as church leaders, we especially love verse 47. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. We love that. We quote it verbatim constantly. Yes, and we're believing it, and we should believe it. But in order to get to verse 47, we skip over verse 46. And verse 46 says that in order for God to add to our number daily, we have to do something. It says this, every day. Right. Every day. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. We all want Acts 47, but we don't want to do Acts 46. We want God to add to our church numbers daily, but only if we meet weekly. Right? Add to our number daily, God. while we meet weekly. We're not fulfilling our end of the bargain. But the good news is, in today's day and age, we can meet with people every single day, right where they are, all the time, using technology, using online tools, using social media. And this is what I call a meta-church strategy. A meta-church strategy. Now, I've been talking about Metachurch long before October last year, when Mark Zuckerberg announced that he was going to change Facebook's name to Meta, and he was going to create this thing called the Metaverse. I've been talking about it long before when I first started talking about it. I was sitting in Andy's office, I was having a one-on-one with him, and he said, what does the future of the church look like? And at that point I called it omni-church, omni-channel church. Now I call it meta-church. Some people call it hybrid church. I like the idea of meta-church, and I like it for this reason. That word meta is a prefix that we all use in multiple words every single, no, well, not every single day, but maybe regularly. And it's a prefix that can mean a couple of different things. So first of all, it can mean, or it most often means to change, as in metamorphosis. Meta means to change. But meta also means to go beyond, as in metaphysical. It's not just physical, it's metaphysical. So it means to change, and it means to go beyond. So when I use meta at the start of this word meta-church, what I mean is a meta-church is a church that goes beyond just the Sunday building, beyond just the building, and is actually changing its model to reach more people in the local community. That's what I call a meta-church. It means to change and to go beyond just Sundays and go beyond just the building. And I believe that in the future church leaders, if you think right now of the leaders in your church who you are like, that's an up-and-coming leader, that's potentially a brand new pastor, that could be a potential campus pastor, I believe that those people in the future are not going to have a goal of becoming a mega church, but a meta church. They're not going to want to be a mega church, they'll want to be a meta church. Let me be really clear about this. A mega church is one expression of church with a large community. A meta church is multiple expressions of church community with one mission. Amen. Multiple expressions of church, in person, online, house church, small groups, virtual reality, augmented reality, podcast, YouTube, multiple expressions of what it means to gather together as the church, but with one mission. That's a meta church. And just to be super clear again, I am in no way advocating against mega churches. My wife and I worked at one of the biggest in the world, and we freaking loved it. It changed us positively in ways we couldn't even, I didn't think we've even fully unpacked. Julian, all the people we love in Atlanta still go to this mega church, and we love it. And believe me, if I lived in Atlanta, I'm going back to Atlanta in April, and believe me, I'm going to North Point. Like, we are still in close relation. I'm not saying I'm against mega church. I just think that the way that the capital C church is changing is that meta is going to become way more relevant than mega. A meta church is a church that's innovative. A meta church is a church that leverages online tools. And when I say innovation, I want to be really clear about that as well, because I think we have this idea of what innovation looks like in the church, or what it should look like. But let me be super, super, super clear here. I think that one of the most innovative things some churches could do is to stop streaming online services. I think the most innovative thing some of the churches in this room could do is to not stream services on Sunday anymore. We think that because we stream services, we're innovative. We're not. Everybody does that. But how are you leveraging streaming? How are you leveraging social media? How are you leveraging online tools to connect with people who live within driving distance of your church who are unchurched at the moment? A meta-church leader understands that people live their lives online. So if we want to reach more people, whether they're unchurched or already churched, then we need to be online as well. In fact, recent McCrindle studies from here in Australia show that 54% of Aussies are on their phone within 3 minutes of going to bed. So they get into bed at night, and within 3 minutes of getting into bed, they're still on their phone, staying awake at night. And they're also 53% check their device within 3 minutes of waking up. Guilty. Who's guilty? Confession time. Are you on your phone within 3 minutes of getting up? Most Australians are, 53%. So we recognize that this is where church leaders need to recognize this is where people are. In the modern world, people are making major life discoveries and major life decisions online, not in church buildings. When life gets complicated, y'all, when life gets complicated, there is a generation that goes to Google and YouTube for solutions, not to a local church. According to its own internal data, Google answers more than 5.7 million questions every minute. Wow. 5.7 million questions every minute. In the time it took me to say that sentence twice, they answered about 3 million questions. Think about that. And more than ever before, many of these searches that people are doing, they represent opportunities for us as church leaders to reach out and connect with people in their great moment of greatest need. More research from McCrindle here in Australia in 2020 shows that in Australia, COVID led to 33% of Aussies more likely to engage with spiritual conversations. Because of COVID, 33% of Australians are more open to having a conversation about faith and spirituality. 41% were thinking more about God than they've ever thought before. This is 2020 stats right here in Australia. 53% were thinking more about their own mortality, and 55% were asking questions about the meaning of life. More than any time that I can remember in my lifetime, more Australians are open to talking about the things of faith and spirituality right now than ever before. We have this unbelievable opportunity, but if we're going to take advantage of it, if we're going to take hold of that opportunity, then we need to start rethinking the way that we approach church. We need to rethink what it means to teach somebody, to disciple somebody. We need to think beyond the church building. We need to think beyond just the physical gathering. We need to think meta and think beyond the physical gathering into what can happen into that digital space. Because it doesn't just happen face to face and in person anymore. In fact, if the Apostle Paul thought like that, then at least 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament wouldn't have been written. Because the Apostle Paul used the technology of his day to disciple people who were far away from him, who weren't physically in contact with him, so he wrote them letters. He used the technology of his day, letter writing. For everybody in the room who's under 30, letter writing is when you take a pen and you press it on the paper and you move your wrist around, okay? But if Paul thought like, a lot of church leaders that we should just do it in person, then 13 books, at least 13 books, wouldn't have been written. So we need to be there in people's greatest moment of need. When people go online and ask these questions about faith and spirituality, that's when the church needs to be there with answers. Do we agree? Yeah. Google calls this the zero moment of truth. Okay, now zero moment of truth is a marketing term. And basically it refers to the moment when somebody is researching a product before they go and buy that product. Here's the example. If I wanted to buy a new camera, what I might type in is, what is the best camera 2022? Yeah? That is my zero moment of truth. And Fuji, Canon, Nikon, Sony pay millions and millions of dollars to make sure that they are on the first page of the results that come up when I type in that question. You've all done this, you've all searched for something online and you'll see it's ad, and then content, right? That's these companies paying huge amounts of money to make sure that they're at the top of what they call the search engine result page, SERP. Fuji, Canon, so they all pay huge amounts of money to make sure when I type in what is the best camera to buy, that they're right there. That is the zero moment of truth. But for us as church leaders and for us as pastors, our zero moment of truth comes when somebody gets online and types in, how can I fix my marriage? Right. How can I be a better parent? How can I overcome this addiction that I have? How do I stop looking at porn? How or where do I find hope? These are our zero moments of truth. And all the data tells us that this is happening constantly every day, millions of times every day. Australians are searching for these things. These moments aren't happening in our church buildings, they're not happening in our small groups, they're happening on Google, they're happening on YouTube. And so the question for us as church leaders is, when the people in your local community, think right now of where God has placed you, where your church building is, think of the families, think of the households within a 30-minute drive of your church. When those people who live in those homes, when they go online and they search for answers about the meaning of life, about God, about faith, about Jesus, about the Bible, about church, when they're looking for hope, when they're looking for purpose, are they connecting with your church? Does your church pop up on the top of the search engine results page? Is your church even on that first page of the search engine results page? At the moment, my wife and I are doing a lot of work. We're partnering with a company called Alpha Australia, which, yeah, everybody's heard of Alpha Australia, right? And this is obviously an organization that is built around the idea of answering questions about faith. I mean, their logo is a question mark. This is what they're built to do. If somebody's got a question about faith, Alpha's the place where you ask those questions, and Alpha helps provide some of those answers. Now, as Alpha started to move online during the pandemic, the guy who started it all, Nicky Gumbel, he was dead against doing online Alpha groups, but he had no choice because the building shut down. At that very first day that online signups came to Alpha, they had a 280% increase in signups, more than they've ever had before, because it became instantly accessible to people who were searching for answers online. Nicky Gumbel has since said in an interview with Karen Newhoff a couple of months ago, he said that he will never go back to not doing online Alpha. It's not replacing, it's not taking away the physical, but he's never going to not do it again because he saw the impact of it. And more people did Alpha in 2020 in Australia than have ever done it before. Their numbers were up like 300%. More Australians were doing Alpha than ever before because of what was happening on. Isn't that interesting? Now, part of the work that we're doing with them, with Alpha, is, they've got a YouTube channel, and one of the things I do is I overhaul YouTube channels for ministries and churches and provide an online strategy for them. And as I talked to their team, their leadership team, they told me that their YouTube channel was basically a place where people shared testimonies about how good Alpha was because their audience was just churches, right? And I said to them, YouTube is the place where people go to find answers for everything from fixing their car to fixing their marriage, and they're right now searching for answers about faith and hope and the Bible and Jesus, and why are you not answering those questions? Come on. And I didn't think that they'd go for it, but they did. They said, that's awesome. We want to change our whole strategy. How do we do that? So my team and I, we pulled together the top 100 faith questions in Australia, the top 100 questions that people are asking online right now in Australia. We pulled that list together, we sent it over to Alpha, and we said, here's what we want to do. We want to create short videos, 2 to 4 minutes, that answer every single one of those questions. So that when somebody types in a question about faith, and Alpha's videos will show up as the answer. And then Google and YouTube will do the evangelism for us. If we optimize it, if we keyword optimize it, if we tag it correctly, if our YouTube channel is optimized, what will happen is Google and YouTube will do the evangelism for us. People are already asking these questions, but they're getting answers from randos, people who don't even have faith. So why don't we change that up, and why don't we change that mix? The idea is that when somebody searches for how do I read the Bible, when somebody searches for how do I become a Christian, Google and YouTube, thanks to our optimization strategy, will throw up Alpha's videos as the answer to those questions. This is a ministry using a Metachurch strategy to reach people who are searching for answers, who are searching for hope, who are searching for purpose. And here's the great thing. This doesn't require a lot of resources. It doesn't require all new lighting equipment and cameras, and it doesn't require any new volunteer teams to be built. It can be simply done by you answering the questions that the people in your local community are asking in their zero moment of truth. So what are those questions? What are the questions that the people are asking who live in the houses that are around your church building? What questions are the people who live within driving distance of your church building asking right now online? When people who live in your community, in that community where God has called you to serve, I want you to picture it in your mind right now, whether it's Sydney or Townsville or Rockhampton, wherever. When people go online and start searching for answers to questions, does your church come up in the answer to their questions? Does your church appear on the front page of that search engine results page? Does it? You can actually check that right now. You can check it. Open up your phone, open up your computer, type in, how do I read the Bible? And see, does your church come up as the answer to that page? In fact, I'm so confident that it doesn't. I've got $100 right here. I've got $100 Australian, and for Julian, I've got $100 US. If somebody can prove to me that when you type in how to read the Bible, your church comes up on the front page of the search engine result page. I'm so confident that it doesn't, because we're not leveraging this tool enough to be there in people's zero moment of truth. But we can be. I'm going to leave this here if somebody wants to prove me wrong. Let me ask you a different question though. Short of typing in the actual name of your church, what would somebody who lives within your community have to type in for your church to pop up on the search engine front page of the search engine result page? Short of typing in the name of your church or the name of your pastor, what question would somebody have to ask for Google or YouTube to throw up your church as the answer? And this is the important thing. This is the thing I would love for you to take away right now. The reality is, in the modern world, people aren't looking for local churches online, they're searching for answers. They're not searching for local churches, what time your service is, they're searching for answers to questions. And if we're going to reach unchurched people, we need to understand and be in that space. See, there's a generation, I believe this to my core, and it's not the younger generation, it's the generation that's alive right now. That's everybody, especially right here in Australia. Australians right now are waiting for us to go into all the world, to go into their world and meet them where they are, to answer the questions that they have about faith and about purpose and about hope and about Jesus and about the church. They're asking these questions, and we can't let a current affair and 60 Minutes throw up the answers for them. They need us to throw up the answers. They don't need the project. They don't need the 7:30 report to tell them what church is like. They need to see it from us. They need to hear it from us. And so we need to leverage this technology. And the need has never been greater, I'm convinced of that. So we need to use technology to create deeper connections with the people during the week, not just on Sundays, not just when it's convenient for us. We need to be doing this during the week so that we can make deeper connections with the people around us. In this way, we get to use 21st century tools to follow Jesus's first century model of discipleship. 21st century tools to achieve Jesus' first century model. Now, I know what I just did was I fire hosed you. Like, I really feel like I fire hosed you. And so what I want to do is this. I want to give you access to all of my slides. And since we all in Australia love QR codes, I've got a QR code here. And if you go to that, what it's going to do, it's going to lead you to a Dropbox. And in that Dropbox, you're going to get all of my slides. All of that data, all of that information is going to be right there in the Dropbox. There'll be a couple of other things, like some free resources about, here's a whole week of social media posts for you. Here's a strategy for what your social media could, to reach people who are unchurched. Here's a strategy for that. Like, there's some free resources in there as well. But I wanted to give that to you guys because I really believe in the thing that Andy said, the thing that Julian said, the thing that Jason said, that there needs to be a church in every community that makes unchurched people want to engage, where unchurched people can go and have their questions answered. Just like Julian expressed this morning, Jason said, Andy said, I get emotional about this because my mother-in-law is not churched and I want her to be. But there's not a North Point Partner Church in Geelong yet. But I want that. But I know she's got questions, and when she goes to find answers online, I want her to find information from people like y'all. So if you won't do it because I convinced you with data, can you do it for Denise in Geelong? Create content that answers her questions. Okay, I'm going to answer questions now. This is the part where I want to contextualize, and I don't know exactly how long I've got, Perko, if you want to do a break or something.
They've got it for as long as needed.
So I literally just want to answer questions now about stuff that I share or about anything online, anything about Australian churches, anything that I can help with. This is where I get to contextualize it for your situation. I want it to be really specific, and I'll talk for as long as they'll let me. Yeah, question in the front.
I've got 3 questions. You want one now or one all now?
Give me one now and break it up.
Okay. All right. So if you're planting a church from scratch, how? If you're planting a church from If you're planting a church from scratch, how would you use all of this to start?
If I was planning a church right now from scratch, I wouldn't be even looking for a school or a hall or any sort of building. I would be planning it online first and foremost. I would start it with a YouTube channel. I wouldn't even bother about any other platforms. I would literally start it with a YouTube channel, and I would just start doing, honestly, I would not preach on Sundays. I would be doing services that were 3 or 4 times during the week. Sundays, yes, then I'd do a Tuesday, a Thursday, and then a Sunday. That's probably what I would do. Each message would be from a different person, shot in a different way, and it would be no more than 12 minutes long. It would be 12 minutes long because the average length of a YouTube video right now is 11 minutes and 20 seconds. And of those 11 minutes and 20 seconds, the average person watches 65%. The retention rate is 65%. After that, it drops off exponentially. And then we wonder why, hey, we post our 35-minute, 45-minute message online and nobody watches it. Yeah, because they don't. Because let's be honest, let's talk about ourselves for a second, right? You type into your car, what's a question you would type into, Sam, what's a question you type into YouTube?
How to surf.
How to surf. You type in how to surf, right? How do I surf? Type that in. Google throws up 3 videos, it always does. One of them's 37 minutes long, one of them is 11 minutes and 20 seconds long, and the last one is 3 minutes long. Which one do you pick?
3 minutes. 3
minutes. We all do. And then if that doesn't help us, we go to the 11-minute version, and then yet churches wonder why nobody's watching their 35-minute messages. That's why. But I'm not saying stop preaching 35-minute messages and do 12-minute. No, what I'm saying is do a 35-minute message, but then edit that, repurpose on purpose. Write that down. Repurpose on purpose. Take your 35-minute message. In fact, Barna Research in the US studied 57,000 church services over a 1-month period and found that the average length of a sermon in America was 37 minutes. I would say it's probably the same in Australia. Take that 37 minutes and chop it up to an 8-minute version. That takes 1 point and a little bit of, and a story, and put that online on YouTube. Then take that same message and break it down to a 2-minute version, just one little, small little bit, right? Post that on YouTube here with links in the description, links in the YouTube end screens, and YouTube cards that pop out across the top that lead people to the 11-minute version. Then in that 11-minute version, the YouTube end screen, the YouTube cards, and the YouTube description should point people to the 37-minute version, right? We lowered the bottom rung on the digital invitation ladder when we create a 2-minute version that leads to an 11-minute version that leads to a 37-minute version, which leads to people watching a whole playlist and a whole message series. If my neighbor says to me, how do I save my marriage, man? I'm not gonna go, oh dude, look, my pastor preached a 37-minute message. Let's just watch it right now. No, but I would text him a 2-minute message that leads to the 11-minute that leads, do you see what I'm saying? So I would be doing that if I was planning a church. That's where I would start. Then down the track, once I built community, I would start developing small groups around the content. Big difference. Build small groups, build community around your content. Create content, then build community around it. And then I would, down the track, maybe lead to a year later, lead to meeting in a hall or something along those lines. But by that point, we would have connected. Now, it's not saying that I wouldn't be meeting anyway. I'd be putting those videos out, and then I would be saying, hey, we found out that in our community, there are thousands of kids that go hungry every morning because they don't get breakfast. What we're gonna do is we're gonna meet together on a Wednesday, and we're gonna wheel barbecues into the local high school, and we're going to gather. The way that we gather together, it's going to be serving the community by serving breakfast to these high school students or whatever it might be. And then, hey, make sure you watch Wednesday's message. Make sure you watch, do you know what I mean? That's what I would be doing. So we'd be gathering. We just wouldn't be gathering formally in a building so that we can all face the same way and look at the person on stage and give them all the credit. Church. Watching YouTube videos and then serving the community. That's how I would plan church. Anybody else? Before we go to question 2.
Thank you, Aussie Dave, big fan. I've often heard you say, in regards to posting on social media, don't tell people what they missed out on a Sunday. Tell people how they can engage throughout their week.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit and maybe give some like practical examples, like, you know, the classic post is, hey, if you missed Sunday, you know, blah, blah, blah. You unpack engaging rather than telling them what they missed.
Yeah. Hey, can we turn this down just a little bit? Like it's popping and I'm trying so hard not to pop. I'm sorry, everybody. When I say my P's. So I see a lot of churches do this, and I'm sorry if anybody in this room is guilty of this. But what we typically do is on a Monday, we've traditionally taken what I call a hairdressing approach to social media. When you go to the hairdresser on a Monday or Tuesday, anybody, guys as well, what is one of the first questions the hairdresser asks you or the barber asks you? What did you do on the weekend? Right? You go on a Thursday, Friday, what's the question they ask you? What are you doing on the weekend? And we have that in church where we have the hairdressing approach to social media. We had such a great, on Monday we post, we had such a great day yesterday. Oh my gosh, it was the best day ever, right? That's what we do. Monday, Tuesday, they're our posts. On Wednesday, you go to the hairdresser Wednesday, they usually ask you, how's your week going? So typically we do that on a Wednesday in church board. And then on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we start saying, we can't wait to see you tomorrow, you're invited, which are all good messages. Yes, we can't wait to see you. Yes, you are invited. Statistically, they're probably not going to come. So that becomes irrelevant at that point. Here's the irrelevance, right? Algorithms tell us that at the most, 8% of your followers will see that post. You're looking forward to seeing 8% of the people, and then this data tells us that only 26% of those 8% will actually come. Yet we still spend all this energy and all this resource trying to get people to come by posting those sorts of things. And we tell them things like, this Sunday is going to be the best Sunday of your life. It's going to be an awesome message. If you're bored, you're going to get hair. All of you are going to lose 10 pounds. Your kids are going to be well behaved by the time you leave. Like we oversell. So what I suggest is, you know, when I grew up before Netflix, right? But this still happens on Netflix. You're watching a show on Netflix that you absolutely love, and it's episode 3 ends, and then it tells you that the next episode starts in 8 seconds, right? Which sometimes the shows say the next episode starts in 30 seconds, and how many of us get so annoyed with that? That's our attention span issue. But what happens is, once that next episode starts, it gives you a recap of what just happened. You literally just watched it 8 seconds ago, but you still get the recap. And most of us, you can skip, but I know I watch it because I want to remember, I've got to remember what happened. Why don't churches do that? Don't talk about what happened on Sunday, it's gone. Happened on Saturday morning, say, hey, here's what happened last week in church. Then I'm ready to go. If I'm one of those 70-something% who didn't go that Sunday because we don't attend weekly, now you've given me an incentive to actually show up because I've not missed anything. I've had the recap and I'm going to go back in. So I suggest churches do stuff like that. So then that leaves open, well, Dave, but normally on Mondays we post what happened on Sunday. What should we post on Monday? I tell you what to post on Monday. Do a shout out to the local first responders. Do a shout out to the local school teachers. Hey, school teachers, want you to know our church is praying for you today. Get into the community and be involved in the community. You know, Andy talked about this yesterday really briefly. He skimmed over it. But if you want, I want the people in your community, in your local community, to say, hey, you know what? I don't know if I believe what happens at Suncoast. I don't know if I believe what those crazy people, in Sam's church believe about the Bible. I don't know when I go to, if I live in the community where Chris is pastoring, I don't know if I believe what they all sing about. They're all really crazy with that singing stuff, and they all put their hands up, which I don't understand, but I don't get it. But you know what? They're the nicest people in the world. You know what? I want to hire somebody from that church because they've got the most integrity of anybody in our community. You know what? I'm a dad and I want my daughter to marry somebody from that church because I know they're going to be cared for and protected and loved, right? So let's start doing social media posts that connect with those sorts of things, or address issues that are in the local community that they're already asking online anyway. So we had a great conversation at our table that in Rockhampton, I hope it's okay for me to share this, where's the Rockhampton guy? That domestic violence is a big issue, right? In Rockhampton right now. What if there was some help for parents, help for kids who are falling victim to domestic violence right now, and you post that out on a regular basis on a Monday morning? That's gonna have so much more impact than reminding people of what they missed. Also, side note to it, Stephen, go back through your Instagram grid today and delete everything that has a date on it that's more than 2 months old. Nobody cares about Christmas from 4 years ago. Nobody cares about Easter last year. Get rid of it, delete it, and start updating your grid on a more regular basis. That's a free tip. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Where,
Thanks. I'm also a big fan of you, Dave. I'm also a big fan of Steve as well. For the keyword optimization stuff, are there free tools and paid tools? Like, what are the tools that you would recommend if we are trying to keyword optimize?
Great question. Bunch of free tools. The best free tool is just to use Google. Open a search page and type in the name of your town, and then type in what is the biggest problem in your town, and just let it Google autofills with the thing that's most searched for around that phrase in your local area. So I think it's like a 50-mile radius of where you're located. Because Google takes into account your past search history, but also where you're located as well. So if you type that sort of thing in, that will help. Then there's another tool called Morning Fame, F-A-M-E. This is the tool that I most often use, but here's the deal. It's a weird setup in that you have to be invited to the platform, but if you want to be invited, when you scan that QR code, you'll get some contact details from me. I'll happily send you an invite to it. I don't know why they do that. I don't get any kickbacks. It's not an affiliation program. They just want somebody using it to invite it word of mouth. So I would and that's $15 a month, which is nothing. And here's the great thing, if I can go one step further. Keyword optimization not only helps you with searching for issues that are happening in your local community right now for you to create this content, like the top 100 faith questions in Australia right now. We started leveraging, I learned about keyword optimization in 2017. And I learned about it because I started all of North Point campus's, all of our YouTube channels. We didn't have a YouTube channel in 2017. Andy gave me the green light to start YouTube channels for every campus. And so as I was starting to look into it, starting to dig into it, I was learning as I was going, and I was basically, North Point were paying me to learn how to use YouTube, which was freaking awesome. And what happened was, I noticed after about 6 months, like, Andy's one of the best preachers, in my opinion, in the world. Yeah, his views were getting like 1,000 views, and I was like, that doesn't seem right. Stephen Furtick gets, hey, comparison. We hate it on social media, but now I'm just comparing. But I was like, I don't know what the deal is there. And so what I started to do was, my boss at the time gave me permission to change the title of Andy's messages, which I was really reluctant to do, because I'm like, I don't want to do that. But he said, no, do it for ones that are like 2 months old. I said, okay, so I changed about a dozen message titles to keyword optimized titles. So for example, Andy had preached this message called Fish Tales, T-A-L-E-S. Now we've all probably done something like that because it's a good alliteration. And it was all about, when I watched the message, it was actually about how Jesus called fishermen, right, to follow him. And it was all about how to follow Jesus. That was what the message was about. But he called it Fish Tales, T-A-L-E-S. And so I changed it to how to follow Jesus. Within 30 days, that video had increased in views and increased in viewer retention by 110%. And to prove that it wasn't an anomaly, what I did was I changed the same video on all the other channels as well, and they went up between 95 and 125% within 30-day period. That was just from keyword optimizing it. When I had that data, I took it back to my boss, Bob Strickland at the time, and he looked at it and he said, you should do this for more videos. So I went back 2 years and retitled every single one to a keyword optimized title, and we watched as it just went like this. It was ridiculous. I had a meeting with Andy. I took it into him and I said, hey, here's all the data that shows what's going on. And he looked at it and he went, I don't remember calling that title Fish Tales. And I said, it was on the very top, like, it was the title, I've got your script. It was there. And he goes, but I don't think when I do that, I just write whatever comes in my head at the time. I don't think anybody takes notice. I said, yeah, we upload every message with that title, or the title that you give me. He goes, let's not do that anymore. Keyword optimize it every single time. And so we started keyword optimizing it before it went onto YouTube, and we just watched, just took off, really took off. So it's a good thing to do, to go back through your archive on YouTube and retitle all of your messages. It's a long process, but it's so worth it. Also, change your thumbnails regularly. Changing your thumbnails regularly to your messages. I try to change all of my thumbnails once a year if I can. Refreshes it, gives it a whole new life. Most of the content that y'all are putting out on social media, especially on YouTube, the messages are evergreen. Unless it's Easter or Christmas, most of it's evergreen. Repurpose that as much as possible. We think that I spend 4 days writing a message, or however long you spend writing a message, and when the doors close on Sunday night, that message is done. No, that message can live on because it's evergreen. Cool. So let's give it more and more space for more and more people to see it. And it just requires things like keyword optimizing, changing the thumbnails, changing out the descriptions, things like that. It takes time, but there are people who in your church who can probably do it. In fact, I would say there's probably high school students in your church right now who know all about this. This church in Waco, Texas reached out to me. I'm writing this book at the moment, and I was looking for all the churches that do YouTube really well, and this church in Waco, Texas, Harris Creek is the church. JP Precluda is the pastor. He stood out to me, so I reached out to him and had an interview with him, and I talked to him about the book, and it was so interesting. What he told me was, when the pandemic hit, and they started doing all their services online, he was sitting at home watching his kids, who were like 11, I think like between 8 and 11, right? Watching him preach at home. He was telling a story during his message about his kids, and his kids were like this, not even watching him. He's like, I was talking about them on YouTube, and they weren't interested, they were watching YouTube. So what he did was, he reached out to a guy in Waco who's a YouTuber, the biggest YouTuber they could find in Waco, Texas, and they contracted this guy to come in and change all of their services. Change all of their videos, change all of their messaging and everything like that. Do stuff like that. You don't have to contract them. There's probably kids in your church right now who know how to use YouTube. Pull them in and ask them questions. Get their feedback on it. And then I'm going to come back. Oh no, sorry, she's got the microphone. Is that okay? Molly.
Hey Dave. Our team here are chaplains from a high school context, and so our question is, can you tell us a bit more about the Parent Q app and the possibilities of using the app to connect with families?
I'm so glad you asked me this question. Everybody uses Orange, right? You all know what the Parent Q app is? Well, why is that funny?
Oh, it's just presumptive, but
okay.
That's okay.
Does everybody know what Orange is? Does anybody not know what Orange is? Okay, good. Do you all know, have you all heard of the Parent Q app?
Yes.
Okay, so the Parent Q app has been around for a long time. I've used it on all of my kids because I'm a dad, and it would cue me with things like, hey, right now your daughters are going through this phase. You need to start doing this and stop doing that. Usually it was, Dad, you need to stop just talking to them. But then it would also give me prompts for questions every week. Hey, I would go, you pick Geordie up from wherever she's being picked up on. Hey, today's a good day to ask Geordie this question. And I would have great conversations. So as a dad, it really helped. What Orange did was, at the end of last year, they rejigged the whole thing to make it church specific. So what you can do right now is you can brand the Parent Q app. You can sign and create a church account, right? Get all of your parents to use the Parent Q app and follow your church account. Essentially, they sign into, essentially your church pays for all of your parents, $20 a month, that's all, for all of your parents to have access to the Parent Q app, and then your church can fill that with all the information, all of the events, all of the activities that are going on in your church, and the app will send push notifications to their phone. So here's how it might work, Molly. Jono and I have been talking about this. John, do you mind if I use you as the example? So Jono preaches in church, he's here every Sunday, and then he's walking out of church. I don't know, I think the battery died. If he's If he's walking out of church, if Jono's walking out of church and he goes and picks Willa up, he walks out with her and gets her in the car, and then he says to her, hey Willa, what did you talk about at kids' church today? And Willa, being how old, Jono? 5, says, he talked about kindness. And that's all she says. He doesn't get any more information. Right? Is that fair, Jono?
Yeah.
Imagine if, as Jono walked out, ping, today in church, Willa learned about Deuteronomy 6, and you should ask her how she hears from God. Hey, Willa, how was Deuteronomy 6 today? How do you hear from God? Then the conversation is being led by the dad, not led by a 5-year-old. That's what the Parent Q app now allows you to do. Go one step further. If your church is attached to a school, which a lot of churches in Australia are, imagine if your school, every parent who went to that school, whether they went to your church or not, got hold of the Parent Q app because it helped them as parents. And this is the thing, relevancy in church world is not moving lights, smoke machines, and skinny jeans and tight t-shirts, right? That's not what relevance is. Relevance is when you meet the needs of somebody right in that moment they need it the most, in their zero moment of truth. If I'm in the middle of the desert and I've been stranded there for a month, and then Sam rolls up and gives me a bottle of water, I'm not judging what sort of car he's driving or what brand of water he gave me. He's the most relevant person in the world to me because he gave me my biggest need, which was water. Make sense? Yeah. Parents, I tell you what, every parent on the planet doesn't know what they're doing. We're making it up as we go. Parents, am I right? We are making it up as we go. I use the Parent Q app purely because it gave me a prompt about what stage my kid was in and gave me a question to ask. It's a helpful tool. So imagine if every parent at the schools in your local community used the Parent Q app because it helped them be better parents, but it was also tied to your church as well, so that when they went looking for a church, or when their marriage was falling apart, or when they lost their job, or when something else happened, they got ill or crisis happened, what church we should go to a church when they've got those questions. Wouldn't it be awesome for them just to open the app and go, let's go to that place that's been helping us be better parents for a long period of time. That's what the Parent Q app can do right now. That's how it should be leveraged by churches, and not enough, I would say not enough churches. It's probably my fault. Can I be super candid with you? It's probably my fault because I don't talk about it enough. But talking to you this morning, talking to Chris yesterday, I'm like, yeah, I've got to talk about this more because it's so powerful. It's such a great tool. I don't know which way to go. Okay.
I've got the talking stick for me.
Talking stick.
The loud stick. Reversing back a bit. If you're that church that your staffing, your organisation, your volunteers, your structure is designed to have an awesome Sunday, and then you're like, okay, this is the future. We have to evolve. How do you deal with the tensions of that? Of like, everything's designed to be great and leans this way. How do you tip the boat back the other way without, I suppose losing good people or, all of that stuff? Like how do you deal with that tension?
Yeah.
Huh?
Is that session 2?
Can I clarify a question? Is the tension from staff or the tension, like core team, or is the tension from attendees? All right, let's do both. If it's staff members, I would be encouraging them to, I would be casting vision and encouraging them to get on board. If it was attendees, cast vision and encourage them to get on board. But I'm not suggesting you change everything about the service. I'm not suggesting that at all. What I would suggest is when it comes to streaming service, I'm going to go one deeper. I'm not suggesting you change what happens in person. If you're running a 60-minute service right now, and there's a hosting spot, 3 songs of worship, then a 30-minute message, and then a farewell, keep doing that. Keep doing that in the room. But what I would suggest is online, don't stream worship. Stop streaming worship online. Now, usually when I say that, people either gasp or this is where I lose everybody. Don't stream worship online. Worship's really important. First of all, music is a way to worship. It's not the way to worship. It's just a way. But we've turned it into the way, especially in Australia, because Hillsong was successful with their worship. So that's the first of all. Second of all, I would say that Disney Plus, before they put the musical Hamilton and streamed it, everybody watched Hamilton on Disney Plus, they streamed it, they made the cast run through that 3 times. These are professional singers who were all getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. They ran through it 3 times to get one, like they combined 3 different performances into one to create that live stream, and then spent $25 million mixing it and doing all the things to get it to a point where it was presentable. $25 million 3 times through. Yet what we do in church world is we pull in a bunch of volunteers who aren't paid, give them a half an hour to rehearse before church service, and then stream their music, and we wonder why then we go, that's so bad, why do we do? Don't do it, don't do it, don't stream it anymore. Third thing is, if you're not streaming the worship, it's an incentive for people who have stopped attending to come back to physical church. Because the one thing that online can't do, the one thing that misses is that standing shoulder to shoulder with somebody, feeling and experiencing that live worship, because musical worship is awesome and it gives you goosebumps. You don't get that online. Yet every church worship leader in the world assumed that during the pandemic, families were standing in front of their computers and in front of their TV screens with their arms in the... They weren't. They were making toast. They were making coffee. They were surfing Amazon. I'm just being real. Because that's what I was doing. And I was on the worship team at North Point and I was still doing that. So I'm just being real. So it gives people an incentive. There's something they're missing out on if they can only get musical worship in person. So I think there's threefold why we should stop doing that. That's the thing. Where'd Joe go? She didn't even ask for the answer. She gone. As soon as I said no worship, she went, I'm out. Does that make sense though? Like, do you see my thinking behind it? So what does that mean? Well, that means if the service starts at 9 o'clock and worship finishes at 9:15, start the live stream at 9:15. At 9:10, have somebody in the back of the room going, hey, welcome to Northside Online, we're so glad you're with us today. Hey, the worship's just happening right now. If you live within driving distance of our church, you don't want to miss. Our team is absolutely incredible. But today we're going to be hearing an incredible message from Pastor Sam. And here's the deal. If you're having trouble with your marriage right now, today Pastor Sam's going to give you 3 things you can do today to improve your marriage. Can you check the data? I go and check the data on YouTube. Here's what happened. You can do this on YouTube on any video. If you want to figure this out later on, you watch live and it is the most inspiring but also the most freaking depressing thing in the world. There's a graph. You can drag the thing across the video, right? So you're dragging across the video and then you watch the graph just plummet. And then it stays at low, 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 low. And then all of a sudden it goes up and I would be like, hey, watch this, watch this, watch this. We get to the button. It's about to go up, watch, click, and it goes up. What's on stage right now? The person who's given the message. People were dipping out of worship and then coming back to watch the message. That was at North Point. I've worked with lots of churches in Australia. They all experienced the exact same thing. So let's just take out the thing that is the most time-consuming, resource-heavy thing to do and just online, just give them just the message. That's what they want. Give them what they want and that will help. And that will create an incentive for people to actually come to the building when they want to experience that worship again. I don't know, Molly, why I'm looking at you, because I don't think you asked a question.
Last question.
But Joe left, so.
Sorry, can I circle back to the Parent Q app and just ask a question about it in relation to the youth resources? Are we able to plug in the current series that the youth choose to do, because we don't follow along with the seasons the way they come out of Orange for Youth? Can we plug that into the app then in the customised church?
Anita, great question. The app works completely independent of Orange. If you don't even use Orange, you can use the app and you can load it up with whatever you're talking about that month. And it's not just for students or kids. You could load up what's happening in the church, in the adult church, and it gets push notifications. The reason the push notifications is super important is studies have been done that neurologically, when your phone lights up, right, there are neurons that fire in your brain, and most people have to find out what that is within 8 seconds. Within 8 seconds. My phone's been blowing up since, like, literally it has, because I think my wife's texting my kids. And it's taken all my willpower not to keep looking at this, but I did sneak one look in, I'm not gonna lie. So the idea of the push notifications, Anita, is really important because, you know, if you've got a night of worship coming up a month from now, you can plug that in. What I encourage people to do is, somebody in your position, somebody in Molly's position, sit down once a month, go to a coffee shop, get a coffee, and plug in the entire month. Schedule it all out so that the push notifications go out at the right time for that month. Just do it like that, regardless of what curriculum you're using, regardless of whether it's kids ministry or family ministry, you can do it for either. The whole thing is branded your church as well. So I've been starting to do this for Suncoast, and my notifications now come through not from Parent Q, they come through from some coast. This is important. This is important because at that point, parent Q is not the hero of the story, right? Not even the church is the hero. The church is not the hero of the story. The parent is the hero. And in that situation, your church becomes the guide. Your church becomes Yoda to those parents, right? They're the hero of the story on this parenting journey of, I don't know what I'm doing, but I need to use a lightsaber to control my kids because they're nuts. And then Yoda, your church, comes in and says, hey, why don't you ask your kid this question today? And that's the power of this, is the opportunity that we have. Can I ask one question? Was this helpful?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Hey, I also want you to know, I'm hanging around. Perko's let me hang around for the rest of the thing. So if you've got any questions, I'm available. Would love to figure out how I can help, support, and serve your church, because I just want you all to win. Thank you so much for having me.
I've got some cash.
It's here.
Cash money.
Needs it.
Hey, before you go, Dave, thank you for carving out so much of your time and for hanging around for the conference, man. We're super grateful. I just want to tell real quick before you sit down, tell one quick thing. Every time I am on a call or lunch or whatever with Dave, I take away at least multiple things that I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great tip. And you talked about the longevity of a message here just a second ago because of changing it and so on. You also taught me about engaging the audience digitally. So I now get people to do a text in. I've taught at a few churches. I get people to text in at the beginning of the message through a dumb like survey and give away a prize or something like that. So they're in the mode of texting into a number. Already built trust, you talked about this. Built confidence. Low level questions like, hey, who's gonna win the grand final this weekend or whatever, people text in. I literally got a text last night, sorry, not a text, text from somebody at Life Point Church, which was 6 weeks ago, asking for a resource at the end of the message that was given. So the point is, that stuff works, and it's longevity, and they just caught the mobile number on the screen, during the message, and it just works. People are on their phones, they're on their devices, and what you're talking about is working. It's not theory, it works.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Chris and I were talking about this yesterday. I'm dobbing you in again. We were talking about this yesterday. Yes, all of that. You have to engage your audience, because preaching in person is different to preaching down a camera. But they're going to be in that room anyway. You need to recognize that they're listening on podcasts while they're multitasking. They're doing 12 different things. That's why we listen to podcasts. You know, podcasts right now are the #1 communication platform online. Number 2 behind YouTube. Because we can watch it, we can listen to the information while we're jogging, while we're cooking, doing whatever it is that you need to do, right? We all listen to podcasts. So grab their attention. Perko uses texts. Hey, here's a quick question. What I often teach people is what's called a hot intro, H-O-T. Hot.
Also stole that from Dave too.
And Chris did too. H-O-T, hot intro. The idea is this, H stands for hook. What is the hook in the water that's gonna make somebody wanna listen, right? The hook might be, I'm gonna give some examples.
I just did one on Monday, we filmed one. So
what was it? What was the hook?
It was sometimes you get bad blood in a relationship, but the relationship turns toxic.
Okay, that's a hook that everybody who's had a toxic relationship, they know. Hey, have you ever do you want to improve your marriage 20%? Everybody goes, yeah, that's the hook, right? Makes sense? So H stands for hook. The O stands for outcome. This is the thing that most pastors struggle with, because the point of our message, the bottom line of our message, we hold till the end. Like it's like the big reveal, but everybody's fallen asleep in the front row by the time that comes around. So give the outcome right out of the top. Hook, outcome.
By the end of this message.
The outcome will be, by the end of this message, I'm going to have told you 2 things you could do to improve your marriage 20%. And if you do the 3rd thing, you'll improve it 45%. One of the first messages I preached at Suncoast when I got back was how to make 2021, how to make 2021 10% better. Slightly better. How to make it slightly better, that's what it was. And everybody's like, why slightly? Well, because you're not going to make it perfect, but it will make it slightly better, and that's what I did. So the hook, then the outcome. What are they going to know by the end of this message? It doesn't have to be about marriage, it could be about, people have basically 5 needs, I think. We all want to be better spouses or better relationally, whatever that looks like in your situation. We all want to be better at work. We all want to have better finances. We all want to lose weight. Like there's probably a fifth one, but we all have similar sorts of felt needs. Speak to those felt needs. Put a hook in the water that calls out the tension, then give them the outcome, and then the T stands for transition. Messages and whole services are won or lost on the transition. So then you need to transition into a story, transition into something that creates common ground. If you're like me, you've probably creating that common ground. So the T stands for transition. Does that make sense? Yeah. Hook, outcome, transition, hot intro. I do this in about the opening 3 minutes of just about every message I preach in the church. Whether I'm new, first time I'm preaching, or if I'm preaching at Suncoast, I always do a hot intro. Yeah.